The cold never bothered Daniel Reyes anymore. 10 years of hauling cargo through the dead zones between star systems had taught him that silence was not empty. It had weight. It pressed against the hull of his ship like something alive, waiting to see if he would flinch. He never did. He just adjusted his course, checked his fuel, and kept moving forward alone the way he liked it. His ship was called the Wandering Det, a name he had picked as a joke after he barely paid off the loan for it. It was not fast, it was not pretty, but it was his, and it had never let him down. That night, as he crossed through a quiet patch of space known for nothing but rocks and silence, a signal broke through the static on his console. A weak, broken distress call, old, almost dead. Daniel leaned forward and stared at the screen. Most pilots would have ignored a signal that faint. Rescue rarely paid well, and dead ships usually meant dead people, but something about the pattern of the signal made him pause. It was not a standard call. It repeated in short, careful bursts, like something trying to save power, like something trying to survive. He changed course. It took almost 6 hours to reach the source. What he found was not what he expected. A long, curved ship, unlike any human design, drifted silently in the dark, its hull torn open on one side like it can ripped apart by something powerful. No engine lights, no life signs on his scanner, except for one small, faint reading buried deep inside the wreck. A single spark of warmth in a ship full of cold. Daniel sat in his chair for a long moment, staring at that small blinking dot. He knew the rules. He knew that boarding a foreign wreck without authorization could bring him trouble he did not need. Alien governments were strict about outsiders touching their ships, especially military or noble vessels, and this one looked important, sleek and reinforced in ways that spoke of wealth and power. If he was caught taking anything from it, human or otherwise, it could mean fines or worse. But that spark of warmth kept blinking on his screen, alive, alone, waiting. He grabbed his emergency suit and moved. The inside of the wreck was worse than he imagined. Bodies lay still along the corridors, tall reptilian figures with scales the color of deep ocean water, their armor scorched and broken. Pirates, most likely. The kind that hit fast, take what they want, and vanish before anyone can respond. Daniel moved past the bodies with practiced calm, his flashlight cutting through the dark, his breathing steady despite the tightness in his chest. The warmth signal led him to a small chamber near the back of the ship, untouched by the attack. Inside, a single incubator unit still hummed quietly, its internal battery nearly drained. Through the frosted glass, Daniel saw it. An egg, large, smooth, a deep shade of blue-black, with faint cracks of light pulsing gently across its surface like a heartbeat. He had never seen anything like it in his life. Daniel checked the incubator's failing systems. Whatever species this egg belonged to, it clearly needed careful warmth and controlled air to survive. The unit had maybe an hour of power left, if that. Everyone else on this ship was dead. There was no one left to claim it, no one left to care for it. If he left it here, it would die alone in the cold, the same as everyone else on this ship. He thought about the rules again. He thought about the risk. Then he unhooked the incubator and carried it back to his shuttle. The trip back to the Wandering Det felt longer than the trip out. Daniel kept glancing at the egg strapped carefully into the passenger seat beside him, its soft light still pulsing steadily, patient and calm, as if it somehow trusted him already. He did not know why he had done this. He was not a hero. He was not looking for trouble. He was just a tired cargo pilot who could not leave something alive to die when he had the power to stop it. Once aboard his ship, he built a proper containment unit using spare parts and warm cloth, adjusting the temperature carefully to match what little data he could pull from the broken incubator. He sat beside it for hours, watching the light pulse steadily, wondering what kind of creature waited inside. He did not know its species. He did not know its history. He did not know what trouble might follow him for taking it. All he knew was that something small and helpless had been left to die, and he had chosen not to let that happen. As his ship drifted quietly through the dark, carrying its strange new passenger toward an uncertain future, Daniel Reyes leaned back in his chair, tired but steady, and made a simple promise to the small light beside him. Whatever you are, he thought, you are not alone anymore. Outside, the stars continued their slow, silent watch, unaware that a single decision made in the cold dark of space was about to change more than one life. 3 days passed before the egg showed any sign of change. Daniel had almost given up hope, though he never said that out loud, not even to himself. He kept the containment unit warm, checked it every few hours, and talked to it sometimes quiet nonsense about fuel prices and old cargo routes, the kind of talk a lonely man falls into when there is no one else to hear him. On the fourth day, the egg cracked. Daniel nearly dropped his toolkit when he heard the sound, a soft snapping noise followed by a low chirp that did not belong to any machine on his ship. He rushed to the containment unit and watched, breath held, as a small crack spread slowly across the smooth blue-black shell. Then another, then a tiny claw pushed through, followed by a wet, trembling snout. It took nearly an hour for the hatchling to fully break free. When it finally did, it lay exhausted in the warm cloth, its scales a soft shade of silver blue, its wings still damp and folded tightly against its small body. It was no bigger than a house cat, but there was no mistaking what it was. A dragon, a real, living dragon, blinking up at him with large, unfocused eyes. Daniel had read enough trade reports to know what species could look like this, though he had never expected to see one in person, let alone hold one. Void dragons were rare, protected, and fiercely valued by their people. They were not pets, they were not cargo, and yet here one was, staring up at him as if he were the only thing in the universe worth looking at. The hatchling made a small, weak sound and reached toward him with one clawed hand. Daniel, unsure of what else to do, reached back. The moment his hand touched hers, something shifted. The hatchling's eyes sharpened, focused, and locked onto his face with sudden, intense attention. She let out a soft chirp, louder this time, almost happy, and pressed her small head into his palm. Daniel had no way of knowing it then, but he had just witnessed something rare and important. Dragon hatchlings imprinted on the first steady presence they encountered after birth, a bond that would shape the rest of their lives, and she had chosen him. He named her Sable, after the deep, dark color of her egg. The following weeks were not easy. Daniel had no manual for raising a dragon, and the ship's database offered little beyond basic biology. He learned through trial and error, feeding her small portions of protein paste mixed with warmed broth, adjusting the temperature of her enclosure again and again until she stopped shivering, and staying awake through long nights when she cried from hunger or fear. Sable grew quickly. Within a month, she had doubled in size, her wings strong enough to make short, clumsy flights across the cargo hold, often crashing into supply crates before Daniel could catch her. He built padded barriers along the walls after the third crash left a dent in one of his storage containers. She did not seem to mind the bruises. She only cared about trying again. She followed him everywhere. When he worked on engine repairs, she curled up nearby, watching with quiet curiosity. When he ate, she waited beside him, patient until he offered the first bite. When he slept, she pressed herself against his side, her small body warm and steady, her breathing slow and even. Daniel had lived alone for a long time. He had grown used to silence, used to the empty feeling of a ship with no one to talk to. Sable changed that without effort. She filled the quiet with her chirps and clumsy footsteps, with her wide, trusting eyes that seemed to believe he could fix anything, solve anything, protect her from anything. He tried not to let that trust weigh on him too much. He was just a cargo pilot. He had no plan for raising a dragon, no idea what would happen when word got out, and word always got out eventually. But every time she looked at him like that, calm and certain, he found it harder to worry about the future. It was during a routine supply stop that the first signs of trouble appeared. A trader at the station recognized Sable's markings immediately and went pale, backing away as if Daniel were holding something dangerous. Within hours, questions began circulating through comm channels. A human alone, raising a void dragon hatchling. Word spread fast among travelers who dealt with alien factions, and faster still among those who understood exactly how rare and how forbidden this situation truly was. Daniel did not know it yet, but far across the stars, in a quiet, orderly chamber belonging to a species that valued order above almost everything else, someone had just received a report that would change everything. For now, though, he only knew one thing for certain. Sable trusted him completely, without hesitation, without fear. And whatever storm was coming, he intended to protect that trust for as long as he possibly could. Counselor Irena had not left her chamber in 3 days. Reports rarely made her angry, but the one placed before her had done exactly that. A hatchling, believed lost in the wreckage of a ship destroyed by pirates, was alive. Not just alive, but in the care of a human, a stranger. An outsider from a species her people considered young, impulsive, and dangerously unpredictable. She read the report again, hoping the details might change. They did not. The ship had belonged to a noble bloodline, one of the oldest among the draconic assembly, and the egg inside it had been meant to carry that bloodline forward. Its loss had already been mourned. Its survival, under the care of a human no less, was not something her people were prepared to accept quietly. Irena was not a cruel person. She had spent her long life serving the assembly with careful judgment and patience. But patience did not mean blindness. Humans were reckless. Humans fought wars over resources her people had learned to share centuries ago. Humans acted first and thought later. The idea of one raising a dragon hatchling, shaping her earliest instincts and behaviors, filled her with something close to dread. She summoned her envoys within the hour and set a course for the last known location of the human ship. Meanwhile, aboard the Wandering Det, Daniel noticed the change before he understood its cause. Communication requests began appearing on his console, formal and stiff, unlike the casual trade messages he usually received. Official seals, careful wording, a polite but firm request for a meeting, followed by coordinates he did not recognize. Daniel considered ignoring it. He considered running, but he knew deep down that hiding would only make things worse. Sable, now large enough to reach his shoulder when she stood on her hind legs, seemed to sense his tension. She stayed close to him as he prepared for the meeting, her sharp eyes watching him with quiet concern. When the assembly envoys arrived, they came prepared for a difficult scene. Reports had warned them to expect a hatchling raised in poor conditions, undernourished, frightened, perhaps even aggressive from stress and mistreatment. Instead, when the airlock opened and Sable stepped forward beside Daniel, calm and alert, her scales bright and healthy, her posture confident, the envoys froze in visible surprise. She did not cower, she did not flinch. She stepped protectively in front of Daniel, her wings flaring slightly, not out of fear, but out of instinct to guard someone she trusted completely. One of the envoys, a tall dragon named Toril, knelt slowly and spoke softly in the old tongue, testing her reaction. Sable tilted her head, curious but unafraid, and answered with a series of confident, healthy chirps, the kind hatchlings made when they felt safe and secure. Toril exchanged a stunned glance with his companions. This was not what they had expected to find. Daniel remained quiet through most of the exchange, watching carefully, ready to step in if needed. He did not trust diplomacy built on assumptions, and he could see the surprise written clearly across the envoys' faces. When Toril finally addressed him directly, his tone had shifted, less hostile, more curious. "You understand," Toril said carefully, "that keeping her was against protocol." "I understand," Daniel replied evenly. "I also understand that leaving her to die in a wrecked ship wasn't much of an option either." Toril studied him for a long moment before responding. "The council will need to see this for themselves." Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected as much. Word of the encounter reached Irena before her own ship arrived at the rendezvous point. She read the envoy's report twice, her sharp eyes narrowing at details that did not fit the narrative she had prepared herself for. A healthy hatchling, a confident, unafraid demeanor, clear signs of proper care and steady affection. It did not align with what she expected from a human's care. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. When her own ship finally arrived and she stepped aboard the Wandering Det herself, she moved cautiously, her guards closed behind her, prepared for any sign of trouble. Instead, she found Sable resting peacefully beside Daniel's workstation, her head tucked against his leg as he calmly reviewed cargo manifests, seemingly unbothered by the presence of an entire assembly delegation aboard his ship. Sable lifted her head as Irena approached, studying the counselor with open curiosity rather than fear. She did not retreat. She simply watched, calm and steady, the same way Daniel often did. Irena felt something shift inside her, a crack in the certainty she had carried since first reading that report. She had come expecting to rescue a mistreated hatchling from a dangerous, careless human. Instead, she found herself standing before a healthy young dragon who looked at every stranger the way she looked at Daniel, without fear, without suspicion, and completely, unshakably certain that kindness was simply how the universe worked. It was not what Irena had prepared for, and deep down, she knew this meeting had only just begun. The hearing chamber was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Tall pillars of pale stone rose toward a ceiling shaped like an open sky, painted with slow-moving lights meant to mimic distant stars. Rows of seats curved around a central platform filled with members of the Draconic Assembly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open disapproval. Daniel stood at the center of it all, Sable pressed close against his side, refusing every polite suggestion to wait elsewhere. He had expected to feel small in a place like this, surrounded by beings far older, far more powerful, and far more influential than himself. It would have been easy to shrink under the weight of their stares. But he kept his shoulders steady and his voice calm when Counselor Irena finally called the session to order. "You stand accused," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "of unauthorized possession of a protected hatchling belonging to a noble assembly bloodline." Daniel nodded once. "That's accurate." A murmur passed through the gathered council. Several members had expected denial, excuses, perhaps even desperate pleading. Instead, they received calm acknowledgement. "Explain your reasoning," Irena continued. Daniel took a slow breath. "I found her ship destroyed. Everyone aboard was dead, except for her, still sealed in an incubator with maybe an hour of power left. I didn't know what species she was. I didn't know the politics involved. I just knew that if I left her there, she'd die alone in the dark. I made a choice. I'd make the same choice again." Another wave of murmurs spread across the room, quieter this time, more thoughtful. One counselor, an older dragon with faded gray scales, leaned forward. "You are aware that your species is considered unfit for shaping the early development of ours. Humans are known for aggression, impatience, short-term thinking." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "I've heard that opinion before. I'm not here to argue about my species as a whole. I'm here because of one choice I made, about one life I wasn't willing to let end." The old dragon studied him for a long moment before sitting back, saying nothing further. Irena pressed on, her tone sharper now, testing him. "A hatchling's early bonds shape her instincts permanently. If those instincts are flawed, if they carry human recklessness or human violence, the consequences could last her entire life. Do you understand the weight of what you have done?" "I understand it better than you might think," Daniel replied. "That's exactly why I was careful. I didn't raise her to be reckless. I raised her to trust the right things and be cautious of the wrong ones. I taught her patience because I don't have the luxury of impatience out here. One mistake in deep space doesn't give you a second chance." Sable, sensing the tension rising around her, moved slightly forward, placing herself between Daniel and the raised platform where the council sat. It was a small, simple movement, but its meaning was unmistakable. She was not frightened, she was protective. A younger counselor, sitting near the back, spoke up for the first time. "Counselor Irena, might I suggest we observe her behavior rather than merely debate theory?" Irena hesitated, clearly displeased at losing control of the pace of the hearing, but she nodded. "Very well, approach her." One by one, several council members stepped down from the platform to stand near Sable, testing her reaction the way Toril had aboard the ship. She remained calm, watchful, but unafraid. When one counselor extended a hand slowly, she sniffed it curiously before allowing a light touch along her scales, her posture relaxed and trusting. It was clear to everyone present that this was not the behavior of a hatchling raised in fear or neglect. Daniel watched the exchange quietly, his jaw tight, his patience thinning but his composure holding firm. He had not asked for any of this attention. He had not wanted to become a symbol in some larger political argument about humanity's worth. He had simply wanted to save a life that would have otherwise been lost. When the council members returned to their seats, a heavier silence settled across the chamber. Even Irena, for all her sharp questions, could not ignore what she had personally witnessed days earlier aboard his ship, and what the entire council had now confirmed for themselves. "This hearing," she said finally, her voice carefully measured, "will require further examination before any judgment can be made." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. He had not expected quick resolution from a body clearly divided in its beliefs. As guards escorted him and Sable from the chamber, whispers followed them through the halls, uncertain, curious, and for the first time, some of them almost respectful. Daniel did not know what the council would decide, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty as Sable pressed close against him, calm and unafraid despite the chaos around her. Whatever came next, he was not going to let her be taken from the one thing she trusted most in this entire universe. The testing grounds sat on a quiet moon just beyond the Assembly's central system, a place chosen for its neutrality and its distance from prying eyes. Daniel had been told little about what to expect, only that Sable would be observed among a mixed group of dragons and humans to determine whether her instincts were sound or compromised. He did not like the clinical way they spoke about her, as though she were an experiment rather than a living creature, but he had agreed to the test anyway. It was the fastest path toward ending the uncertainty hanging over both their lives. Captain Orlo Vance arrived the same day, sent by human authorities who had caught wind of the growing diplomatic situation. He was a broad, steady man with a calm voice, the kind of officer who had spent more time solving problems quietly than boasting about solving them loudly. He found Daniel checking over Sable's harness near the testing field and extended a hand in greeting. "Heard a lot about you," Vance said. "Didn't expect the dragon raising a fuss over politics to be this friendly-looking." Sable studied him for a moment, then chirped and leaned forward for an introduction sniff, unbothered by his uniform or his unfamiliar scent. Vance chuckled, clearly surprised by her calm curiosity. "She trusts easily," Daniel said. "Too easily, some might say." "Some might say that's not such a bad problem to have," Vance replied. The test began shortly after, with a mixed group of dragons and humans positioned at a distance, each instructed to behave naturally while observers recorded Sable's reactions. She moved between them with steady confidence, greeting strangers the same way she greeted Daniel, without fear, without hesitation, offering trust freely to anyone who did not immediately threaten her. The observers noted every detail, comparing her behavior against known patterns from properly raised hatchlings. So far, everything pointed toward healthy, stable development. Then the alarms sounded. A group of unmarked ships dropped out of hyperspace above the testing field, moving with the practiced precision of raiders who had done this before. Weapons fire scattered nearby structures as personnel scrambled for cover. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating dangerous trade routes, kicked in immediately. He grabbed Sable and pulled her toward the nearest shelter, shielding her with his body as debris rained down nearby. "They're after her," Vance shouted over the chaos, drawing his weapon as he moved to cover the retreat. Word's been spreading about a dragon hatchling connected to a noble bloodline. Someone sees profit in that. Several assembly guards moved to intercept the attackers, engaging in short, sharp bursts of defensive fire. Daniel kept low, getting Sable through a narrow maintenance corridor as the fighting intensified above them. She trembled slightly against him, frightened for the first time since he had known her, but she did not panic. She stayed close, trusting him completely to lead her somewhere safe. A group of raiders broke through a side entrance, cutting off their planned escape route. Daniel pulled Sable behind a support pillar, his mind racing for options. He had no weapon beyond a small utility blade, hardly enough to fend off armed attackers. Then Sable moved. Before Daniel could stop her, she darted forward, wings flaring wide, and let out a sharp, powerful roar that echoed through the corridor. It was not an attack, not exactly, but a burst of raw defensive instinct, loud enough to stagger the nearest raider and buy precious seconds. Daniel seized the opening, tackling the stunned attacker and disarming him quickly, years of old training returning to his hands without hesitation. Vance arrived moments later with reinforcements, clearing the remaining raiders with efficient, practiced movements. Even a few assembly guards, initially skeptical of working alongside humans, found themselves fighting shoulder to shoulder with them, united by the shared goal of protecting the young hatchling caught in the middle of it all. When the fighting finally ended, the field lay quiet again, smoke drifting slowly upward into the pale sky. Daniel knelt beside Sable, checking carefully for injuries, relief flooding through him when he found none. She pressed her head against his chest, still trembling slightly, but calm now that the danger had passed. Counselor Irena arrived shortly after, having watched much of the encounter from a secure observation post. She approached slowly, her earlier sharpness softened by what she had just witnessed. Sable had not fled. She had not frozen in fear. She had acted with instinctive courage, the same steady bravery Daniel had shown throughout the entire ordeal. "She protected you," Irena said quietly, almost to herself. Daniel nodded, still holding Sable close. "She protects the people she trusts. That's not a flaw. That's exactly what you'd want from her." Irena said nothing for a long moment, watching the two of them together, human and hatchling, bound by something far stronger than politics or protocol. For the first time since this entire situation began, she found herself with no argument left to offer. Weeks passed before the assembly reached its final decision, weeks filled with quiet meetings, careful reviews, and long debates that Daniel was not always invited to attend. He spent most of that time back aboard the Wandering Det, keeping to familiar routines, repairing small systems that did not really need fixing, simply to keep his hands busy while he waited. Sable stayed close through all of it, her earlier fear from the attack fading quickly, replaced by her usual steady confidence. When the summons finally arrived, requesting his presence at the Assembly's central chamber one last time, Daniel felt none of the nervous tension that had gripped him during the first hearing. Whatever the outcome, he had already made peace with the choice he made back in that wrecked ship. He would not have done anything differently. The chamber was fuller this time, nearly every seat occupied, the air thick with quiet anticipation. Counselor Irena stood at the center platform, her posture composed, though something in her expression seemed softer than before, less guarded than the sharp, skeptical counselor who had first confronted him. "We have reviewed every report," she began, addressing the full assembly rather than Daniel directly. "We observed the hatchlings' behavior across multiple encounters under both calm and dangerous circumstances. We expected to find instability, carelessness, the reckless traits often associated with human upbringing." She paused, her gaze finally shifting toward Daniel and Sable, standing calmly near the chamber's entrance. "Instead, we found a hatchling who trusts freely, who acts with courage rather than fear, and who extends kindness to every stranger she meets, without hesitation, without suspicion. We searched for flaws in her development and found none. If anything, her behavior stands as a model example of healthy, secure attachment." A murmur passed through the gathered council, though this time it carried less doubt and more quiet acknowledgement. "It would be easy," Irena continued, "to dismiss this as an unusual case, an exception rather than evidence of anything larger. But I have come to believe otherwise. This hatchling's trust did not come from nowhere. It came from consistent kindness, shown to her every single day by one man who owed her nothing, expected nothing in return, and chose to protect her simply because it was the right thing to do." She turned fully toward Daniel now, her voice steady. "We were prepared to judge your entire species based on old assumptions, old fears, and outdated conflicts long since resolved among our own people. What we witnessed instead was a single act of decency, repeated patiently over time, shaping a life for the better. That is not something our laws were built to punish. It is something they should have been built to honor." The council formally granted Daniel full guardianship of Sable, along with an official acknowledgement recorded in Assembly archives, recognizing his actions not as a violation, but as an example of cross-species compassion rarely seen in recorded history. Several council members who had once viewed him with suspicion approached afterward, offering quiet words of respect, some even requesting to properly meet Sable now that the tension of the hearings had finally lifted. Captain Vance met Daniel outside the chamber, grinning as he clapped a firm hand on his shoulder. "Guess you're something of a diplomat now, whether you wanted the job or not." Daniel huffed a tired laugh, glancing down at Sable, who pressed happily against his side, sensing the shift in mood around them despite not fully understanding the political weight of what had just occurred. "I never wanted to prove anything about being human. I just didn't want her to die alone." "Sometimes," Vance said, "that's exactly how the biggest changes start. Small, simple choices nobody expected to matter." As they walked together back toward the docking bay, Sable trotted ahead, her wings stretching wide in the open air, greeting passing strangers, dragon and human alike, with the same easy trust she always carried. She had grown stronger since that fragile night in the incubator, more aware of the wider galaxy around her, its politics, its dangers, its complicated history between species. But none of that had changed the one truth she carried at her core. She believed, without doubt or hesitation, that kindness was simply how the universe worked. Because the very first being she had ever known, the one who found her alone in the freezing dark and chose to save her without expecting anything in return, had shown her exactly that. And as the wandering Det prepared to leave the Assembly's central system once more, carrying its quiet pilot and his fiercely loyal dragon back into the stars, neither of them noticed the small, lasting change they had left behind. Not just in the laws of one ancient council, but in the way an entire civilization would remember, for generations to come, that sometimes the actions of a single person could reshape the beliefs of an empire. All because one man chose kindness first.